Today we are going to be working on the largest kit for the channel so far, and one of my favourite monsters from Middle-earth, the Balrog. Now, at first glance, it can look a little bit overwhelming and intimidating to paint, especially for someone who hasn't painted for long or are not used to large miniatures yet. So we shall break this down section by section, and there'll be chapters timestamped in the description for you to look back on. We shall tackle the lava look between the scales and the cracks of the skin, as well as the flames first, as this is one of the main sections of the miniature. Now, we want to create a punchy yellow base coat first. If we just use a yellow paint and apply it directly onto the black, it will dry darker and also have a slight greenish look to it due to the undercoat of the black. At least that is what I have found with Army Painter and Games Workshop paints. However, if someone that is watching knows of a brand that has great yellows for base coats, then please do share with everybody in the comments below, because sharing is caring. So to tackle this, the solution is to paint the areas with white first, and then apply the yellow over the top. However, I experimented with a new method on this particular miniature, and that was to use some 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝐴 plastic putty. Say what? Hear me out now. Now this stuff, I use to fill in gaps on miniatures, especially on larger kits like this 𝗕𝗏𝗏 here. Once dry, you can prime your miniature with a spray can, or just paint straight over it like we will do here. So for the Balrog, we are going to water down this putty with some tap water. We want to make it roughly the same consistency as paint, and apply it all over the areas of the cracks. It's quicker to do the whole thing rather than each individual crack, and then use your finger to wipe off the top surface, leaving the white putty in the recessed areas. Oh, and a tip here, don't use your best brushes for this. It's much wiser to use a cheaper brush, or one that has seen better days. Now you absolutely can just use a white paint instead and wipe the excess off with a finger. Both methods will work fine and dandy. However, I like this putty version better, as it takes a few minutes longer to fully dry, so it allows me more time to take off the excess on the top surface that we want black. We are going to spend some time on the face later, as this will be a highly focal point on the miniature. And we shall create some nice details here, including his fiery little mouth. Afterwards, the only thing left to base coat was his sword and flames. Whilst painting the white, it's better to do a couple thinner coats rather than one thick layer, just to make sure that we don't cover up any of those details. So if it looks slightly grey on the first pass, don't worry, as the second layer will do the trick. Now we are ready to make the Balrog look fiery. We need yellow for this to make it look punchy and bright before we add our darker colours of oranges and reds. Here, an Army Painter Zealot Yellow speed paint was applied with a large monster brush. You can instead use a normal acrylic paint such as Phoenix Flames and water this down, and it will look fairly similar at the end result. Again, with the speed paint, apply this over the whole area, just like what we did with the white earlier. And be sure to take off any excess with your finger, because I ain't got no time painting each crack individually. But I can make time for a cup of tea and browse some of Alan Lee's drawings of Middle-earth for inspiration on future projects. And whilst I'm on a project, I try to be as time efficient as possible. So, if I can save time here and there by painting the base coats, then I can use that extra time to add more details where I think it would best suit the miniature, such as the wings and the face for this project, which we shall get onto later. For any other tips and tricks that you guys do to save time, then please write them down below and we can all share ideas. So, we should have our yellow added to the areas that we need on the Balrog. I also went ahead and did a test colour scheme for the fire on one section. Continuing on with the main fiery section on his back, some Fire Giant Orange was applied onto the upper half of the flames. I have done a full fire tutorial previously with 2 ways of painting it, if you would like a quick fire, or one that is more detailed. So I will link this useful video for you here, and you can check it out after this one. Once the orange has dried, we moved on to the next paints, which were Blood Red, followed by Slaughter Red afterwards. Each stage was painted on so it formed a gradient from the lighter yellow at the bottom to the darker reds at the top. Using the medium here is very useful as it makes the paint go translucent, enabling you to see some of the colour from underneath, which will help with the blending of the colour for the flames. For some added interest, the tips of the fire were turned into a smoky look with the use of black. These were added to most of the higher points of the flames. And then some grey highlights were sparingly added across these areas to give it a wispy appearance. And now we want the fire to look even hotter. So we will switch over to our acrylic paint of Moondust. This paint was thinned down slightly with water and applied at the bottom of the flames. With the use of water, it will make the speed paint layer underneath reactivate slightly, which is perfect for what we want. It will blend the colours in together slightly and create a nice gradient as we apply the paint. At this point I added a little bit more fire giant orange between the orange and the red, just to give it a bit more transition. And you can go back and forth with these speed paints until your desired effect. We then switched over to a brighter paint of Arid Earth, but this time adding it more into the crevices of the flames to make the inside part look hotter. Hopefully you can appreciate the amount of steps taken to create this look, but each stage only takes just a few moments to actually paint on. The longest part of this is actually waiting for the paint to dry. But as this Balrog is basically a walking fireball, once you have painted one colour on everything, then you can apply the next step straight away. And just for some added detail, the Arid Earth paint was dotted on randomly onto a few of those flames protruding out, to create that flickering look. Now, let's get on to that sword. I wanted to paint more efficiently, so I switched over to a makeup brush. For those that have seen other videos on this channel, you know I love these brushes to create quick blends with little effort involved. Here we already have our speed paint colour on before switching on to our last two acrylic colours. Using my hand as a reference, you can see what the layer of paint will look like before it goes onto the model. Applying the colour in a circular motion allows the layers of paint to build up to the required amount. And you can see how quick this process is. And like for our flames before, we want the edge of the sword to feel even hotter. So Arid Earth was used as a highlight. Once finished, I had a quick look at the sword and thought, as it's one of the main focal points to the miniature, I will just add a couple extra details to make this more visually appealing. So a combination of our yellow and orange speed paints were pattered onto the areas just where the sword and the flames meet. As this paint flows into the recesses, it will make the flames pop out a bit more. And then some flickering highlights were added here and there to make the flames more impactful, as well as adding a few lines to the very tip of the sword, and this will make it even brighter. Now our Balrog will be a great host for our next barbecue with friends. The face also used the same colours as the rest of the flames before. Here we wanted the hottest areas to be coming from the back of the mouth, so the oranges and reds were applied to the tip of the tongue as well as the gum line between the teeth. And the tongue was highlighted with our Moondust and Arid Earth paints. This will then lift the outline of the tongue from the darker areas of the mouth, and it draws the eye in immediately. The nostrils and the eyes were picked out in the same way, using the brighter yellow colours in the centre of the details. Okay, so nearly all of the fire section is done now. We just have the cracks in the scales to go. We have our initial yellow colour present from before. Looking at the model, the brightest yellow is near the top of the body, so we will follow this strategy whilst doing the cracks. The orange and the red will be applied going away from the top flame from his back. Same as before, the speed paints were made more translucent with some medium to allow the brighter yellow to still be present underneath the orange layer. And this was applied to the majority of the scales, including all of the cracks on the arms, the legs, and the wings. For the tail, we only need to go up halfway, just for that gradual change of colour once finished. The red was done in the same process, but this time we only covered about half of the orange towards the lower sections of the miniature. All of this was done in mind of having multiple colours present for that fiery molten look, which I hope you will agree looks pretty good. And more importantly, hopefully yours will too. And once again, for that added heat, some watered down moon dust, then arid earth, was prodded into some of the cracks on the top of the body near the bottom of the flame, just to intensify that yellow colour that little bit more. At this stage, I should say don't worry about getting any of this paint onto the black scales, as we should be working on them in a moment. We just wanted to concentrate on the fiery sections only. As this Balrog is creepy looking and loves the dark depths of Moria, the wings were painted to mimic a bat-like creature. So the intention is to keep them darkish, but have pale skin tones in there too. The base colours themselves didn't take a great deal of time to apply, as our trusty makeup brushes were used for this, to create our blended look. If you don't have makeup brushes, then using a dry brush would give a similar looking result, but the soft bristles of these makeup brushes I find are much better to use. And for you, I will leave a link in the description if you would like to pick up a set, as they are fairly inexpensive. And being an affiliate link, I do get a small commission for purchases which I put back into the channel to make more of these types of videos for you guys. And best of all, it doesn't cost you anything extra. A combination of mocha skin, followed by fur brown, and finally tan flesh were used to create a subtle change in colour from dark to light. Each time you apply these, just paint a smaller area and towards the bottom of the wing as you go. You can leave the edges black for our darker tones. This technique can be quite universal, so you can imagine this on, say, a Witch King on 𝗕𝗿𝗄, some Stormcast Draconiths from Age of Sigmar, or even some Tyranids for our 40k friends out there. Once we have covered the wing area with our fleshy colours, a super watered down slaughter red speed paint was added to these black areas, and feathered in slightly towards the centre of the wing. This then does three things. The thinning down of the paint with some clean water creates a glaze, and allows the paint underneath to still be seen. Secondly, it enhances the blended look that we did before with our makeup brushes. And thirdly, adding the red tones to the wings just looks friggin' cool. Now you can stop here with the wings and they will look perfectly good for the battlefield. But if you want to punish yourself like me, then you can add some further details by painting small lines with tan flesh and go along the sculpted areas of the wings. I didn't pick them all out as I thought this would be unnecessary, but doing this on all of the wing sections took quite a while. So beware. And to further enhance the edges of the wings, some heavily watered down grim black speed paint was applied just like our slaughter red, and this was feathered out with our makeup brush. Once dry, we have made our Balrog look more evil looking. Nice. Now that's done with, we can move on to our black scales and skin for this magnificent beast. A larger brush with an increased surface area, such as a dry brush or a makeup brush, can be used to apply some black paint over the scales. Now, I wasn't too bothered here if some black went into the fire sections between the scales, as it adds to the lava effect. But try not to get any on the actual flames themselves, otherwise you will need to tidy them up afterwards. The arms, legs and wings were worked on too, to get this black coverage prominent on these areas. For the smaller, more fiddly sections, I switched over to a smaller brush to pick out the scales more easily. This is especially useful for the leg areas, as the details of the cracks are not as deep as the ones on the top of the model, so picking these out individually would help. To give the skin some added colour and highlights to the muscles, darkstone paint was applied with the makeup brush. This was done to give our miniature a lighter, subtle colour, but still keeping that darkish black look to it. This was applied to pretty much all of the skin, as well as the scales that protrude out, so you can focus your efforts on most of the muscle structure in the arms and the legs, as well as the wings. And to enhance the muscles even further, field grey was used to make these areas even lighter. A couple tips here. If you have your painting light just above your head looking down on the miniature, then you will see where the light hits the upper areas of the Balrog's skin. This is where you would need to brighten up the skin tones, leaving the darker areas alone for the shadows. It would be wise to go over the whole miniature once to see where the lighter colour is needed the most. And if you feel like you need to go over them again, then do so. But watch out, it's very easy to do too much and make the skin look more grey, rather than a highlighted black. These same two colours were used to highlight the face of the Balrog. Because the detail of the sculpt is quite refined here, then doing these highlights can really give the miniature some character. So now we shall really start to enhance some of the details on the miniature. The arms and the wings have a series of cracks in the skin, and we enhance these with the grey of 𝗕𝗿𝗂𝐃𝐒. This grey would also be used to pick out the highlights of the scales. Keeping these highlights as thin as you can whilst painting them here would be ideal, as you only want to pick out the edges and still have the black and the fire as the main areas of focus. And now that you are a highlighting machine, other areas of the Balrog were also picked out, such as the fingers, the wings, and his amazing six-pack that he's got going on. You can really go to town with highlighting this model, and it depends how far you would like to take it. In my mind, doing these extra details on larger kits like these is well worth it, as they are a centerpiece to an army, and they can be a really good talking point with your friends when you game. And because I'm a stickler for details, some of the scales have had some small dots of lava orange applied to them, just to mimic little sparks of fire landing on the surface. You may not notice these from a few feet away when you are gaming, but bon Jovi, you know that they are there. As we look at the Balrog as a whole, we instantly look at the face. We have a fiery look surrounding it, and we want to draw the eye into the face even more by now painting the horns. Our good old makeup brush was used to create a quick transition from dark to light. Firstly, 𝗕𝗿𝗂𝗧 was painted about 3/4 up the horns, and then this was followed up by 𝗕𝗏𝗂𝗀, which was only painted halfway up, leaving some of the 𝗕𝗿𝗂𝗧 just above this new paint. And finally 𝗕𝗏𝗂𝗀𝗏, which was used for the bottom quarter. Now, the nice thing about using blues for the last two colours is that they are a cooler looking colour, and they will contrast nicely with our warmer tones for the fire. And it will also frame the face as we look at it. To enhance the details of the horns, we will highlight the ridges that are on them, and make the face area look even better. Here, the 𝗕𝗏𝗀𝗏 paint was applied as highlights to where the black remained, as well as the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗏𝗧 cloak areas. Then the 𝗕𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏 was highlighted where the 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 was painted on, and then finally 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 was painted where the 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 was applied by the makeup brush earlier. Additionally, you could add some dots with the 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 to all of the edges of the grooves, should you want to go this far with your highlighting. Using these last three paints, the claws on the hands, feet and wings, as well as the teeth, were picked out also. For an extra bit of definition, and this is optional if you want to, Banshee Brown was used on some of the more prominent areas of the face, to give that little bit more sharpness to the details. And a few final dots of moon dust were added to the top of the scales to embellish that flickering ember look. It's nice having spent that little bit extra time on some areas, as it is such a large model compared to his goblin friends. I hope that you will have as much fun painting yours as I did with this one. And for more Middle-earth content, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on your notifications. Stay classy YouTube, and keep on hobbying.